Greetings, friends. I'm Ihor Havrishchak. Today is Wednesday, June 4th. I'll share the top news from this crazy world. Before we start, please like the video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. It's great to see our audience from all over the world interested in Ukraine. And of course, this is how you promote Ukrainian language content and defend our pro-Ukrainian position together with us. Well, I'll start with a legendary phrase, a legendary quote. We will go to the end. We will fight on the seas and oceans. We will fight with growing confidence and strength in the air. We will defend our island, no matter what the cost. We will fight on the coasts, in the ports, on the land, in the fields, and in the streets, on the hills. These were the words of the legendary British Prime Minister Winston Churchill when Britain launched its defense against Nazi Germany. This is his legendary speech, which was broadcast on the radio. And we see that in Ukraine, Churchill's words are embodied by a little hero. And it seemed that this was the reason to use nuclear weapons. This baby is growing up before our eyes, so to speak, because Russia and Putin did not have time to recover and understand what happened to their strategic aviation, to the weapons that they were scaring everyone with, that we would take them up into the sky and launch nuclear missiles. Instead, Putin had to go down to the bottom, underwater, and see what happened to the pylons of the Crimean Bridge. And to launch his Yars and Bulava. But let's remember that these missiles have been launched by the Russians on numerous occasions, and many of these training launches have failed. Of course, Putin could have transported the nuclear weapons in his Lada Kalina, but by the way, the latest news is that Avtovazi is raising prices for Lada Kalinas again, these coffins on wheels. What am I talking about? The fact that the security service of Ukraine is working tirelessly and showing Putin that Russia can be completely destroyed if necessary. And you can destroy the most important, most fundamental things. Let me remind you that on June 1st, there was an attack on the airfields of the Russian Federation. The security service of Ukraine conducted an unprecedented, phenomenal operation called the Web. Putin did not even have time to count how many airplanes he was missing, as the pylons of the Crimean Bridge shook. The SBU said it conducted a new unique special operation and hit the Crimean Bridge for the third time on the morning of Tuesday, June 3rd. According to the SBU, the operation lasted several months. First, the agents mined the pillars of the Crimean Bridge, and yesterday, on Tuesday, June 3rd, the first explosive device was activated. Intelligence agencies reported that the explosion occurred at 4:44 a.m. There were no civilian casualties, according to the Security Service of Ukraine. It is also reported that 100 kilowatts of TNT equivalent explosives were used. The underwater supports of the pylon were heavily damaged at the bottom level. In fact, the Kerch Bridge is now in a state of emergency, the Security Service of Ukraine added. The head of the SBU, Lieutenant General Vasyl Malyuk, personally supervised the operation and coordinated its planning. He said, "God loves a trinity, and the Security Service of Ukraine always follows through and never repeats itself." Previously, we hit the Crimean Bridge twice in 2022 and 2023, so today we continued this tradition underwater. Malyuk emphasized that not a single illegal object of the Russian Federation is located on the territory of Ukraine, so the Crimean Bridge is an absolutely legitimate target. Especially given that the enemy used the Crimean Bridge as a logistical artery to supply its troops. Crimea is Ukraine, and any manifestations of occupation will receive our tough response, added the head of the Security Service of Ukraine. Let me remind you that God loves the Trinity. The Crimean Bridge is under attack. By the way, the occupiers themselves initially said that their air defense system had allegedly shot down a jet drone, and the wreckage fell on the bridge. But later, everyone saw the footage, and there were a lot of jokes and memes about it. They say that even an underground truck arrived, which released drones, and then the same truck drove under the supports of the Kerch Bridge, because the explosion on the video footage from the security service of Ukraine was powerful, and the supports were really damaged. This is the third attack, and the SBU has mastered all possible and impossible methods and directions of attacking this line Putin is so shaky about, the Kerch Bridge. It has already been attacked directly with a truck, then over the water with drones, and now underwater. I think the Kremlin is just panicking. They don't know where and how to defend, where to get protection underwater. Perhaps it is worth submerging the Pantsiri and letting them work as air defense. This is an absolutely unprecedented situation. The Kremlin is in a stupor. Let me remind you that Ukraine attacked the Kerch Bridge for the first time on October 8, 2022. Then at 6 a.m. an explosion occurred on the railway line of the bridge. A passing truck exploded, the footage was vivid, and the bridge was effectively paralyzed. The second attack occurred in the summer of 2023, on July 17th, when drones attacked the bridge at night. They forced one of the canvases of the Crimean Bridge to bend because they had hit the supports again. In general, I would like to say that the Crimean Bridge was first blown up by a truck. Then the Russians began to introduce unprecedented security measures and checks when crossing this illegal construction site. Later, there was an attack with surface drones, and the enemy threw barriers into the water to keep the drones away. The security service of Ukraine found an underwater direction to hit the key pillars of the Kerch Bridge. We will know about the consequences later, because only now there is information about the attack of the web by drones on the airfields of the Russian Federation. The General Staff updated its stats. Russian aircraft losses rose from 12 to 41. Not all were destroyed during the June 1st Operation Web near Russian military airports, but all are damaged, limiting their air activity. Now the Kerch Bridge will be counted separately. Crimea and this bridge are crucial to Putin, yet despite their claims of strong defenses, they can't protect it from the Ukrainian security services attacks.
Путіна важливий Крим, важливий міст, який фактично під атакою. І тепер точно ми бачимо, що беззахисний. Бо як би вони не кричали, що вони там понаставляли велику кількість ешелонної оборони, не можуть вони захистити від Служби безпеки України.
President Volodymyr Zelensky briefly mentioned the attack on the Crimean Bridge in his evening address. He simply said, "The security service of Ukraine, well done." Speaking generally about the phenomenal special operations of the security service of Ukraine, there is already information that the United States did not know about the intentions and planning of the Ukrainian defense forces to hit the strategic targets of the Russian Federation. Ukraine was secretly preparing a series of strikes on Russian air bases as part of the operation called the Web, because it knew that Washington would object to it. The New York Times reports this with reference to its sources. With its bold drone attack deep inside Russia, Ukraine is reshaping 21st century warfare, say U.S. officials and analysts. They confirmed Ukraine did not warn the Trump administration beforehand. This secrecy was expected, as any leaks could have endangered those involved. Ukraine has always guarded operational security carefully, especially after Trump officials like Michael Walls and Hexit leaked attack details in signal chats.
Україна завжди ретельно оберігала оперативну безпеку, особливо після того, як посадовці Трампа, пригадуєте, так, Майкл Волц і Гексет, вони позливали інформацію атаки на хуситів в чаті Signal.
The US and Ukraine are not currently planning joint strikes on Russia, the newspaper reports. American officials say Ukrainians knew Russia's strategic bombers are off limits for the US, so they didn't share their plans. A NATO defense official noted Ukraine's strikes sparked debate about ally vulnerabilities. Our Ukrainian forces have repeatedly shown they don't follow the idea of escalation with Russia.
Чи потрібно союзникам переоцінювати свою вразливість? Вже неодноразово, до речі, так, наші сили оборони України демонстрували, що нема поняття ескалації з Росією.
There is no need to be afraid of Putin, no need to tremble before the Kremlin. We proved this when we hit the bridge. We proved this when we entered the Kursk region. It was just that everyone was quiet then. Our partners thought, oh my God, what are the Ukrainians doing? They are boldly entering the territory of the aggressor, entering the territory of a nuclear power. The defense forces entered the Kursk area and held their positions there for a long time, destroying a large number of enemy troops. Now we see strikes on strategic aviation, which is the nuclear triad, or was the nuclear triad of Russia, and now the bridge, for which Putin seems to be ready to do anything. No, there is no need to be afraid, Ukrainians say. Look what we have done. You can destroy the enemy on their own territory without fearing Russia's nuclear threats, despite their claims about protecting sovereignty like in Kursk. Putin calls the Crimean Bridge's destruction vital for Russia's survival. But Ukraine's armed forces, security service, and Vasyl Malyuk prove the enemy must be defeated. Russia has responded to the spiderweb operation, explaining why they have remained silent so far.
Не треба боятися. Збройні сили України, Служба безпеки України і Василь Малюк показують, потрібно ворога нищити. До речі, в Росії вже відреагували на спецоперацію Павутина. Ну, як відреагували? Вони, скажімо так, пояснили, чому вони мовчать. І далі мовчать, до речі.
The Kremlin finally commented on Ukraine's large-scale drone attack on Russian airfields. Dmitry Peskov, Putin's press secretary, said Putin was informed online on Sunday. Peskov joked they showed Putin a screen of Vasyl Malyuk to explain it. He added that the investigation by the Russian Investigative Committee and Defense Ministry is still ongoing before making final statements.
При цьому Пєсков для конкретних заяв про атаку запропонував дочекатися підсумкових результатів слідства. Він каже наступне: триває слідство, яке розпочав слідчий комітет Російської Федерації, і була також заява міністра оборони.
I propose to wait for the results of the investigation and focus on the content of the Ministry of Defense's statement. Interestingly, do you remember the recent two events, the explosions of bridges in the Kursk and Bryansk regions, where locomotives caught fire, passenger trains were crushed, and Russians died? 13 people were killed and many wounded, if I'm not mistaken. In this case, the investigative committee immediately classified it as a terrorist attack, and even the propaganda publication Kommersant wrote that they found the remains of C4 explosives, American, and it was obvious that it was Ukrainian saboteurs. Someone was even detained who blew it all up.
Частки, залишки вибухівки Сі-4, що це американська вибухівка, що, очевидно, це були українські диверсанти, навіть когось там були затримали, хто підривав це все.
And here is the investigation. Let's wait, let's understand. We see how different Russia's testimony is. Here they quickly threw together and said who was to blame, without even having time to analyze anything properly. And here, in the case of the drone attack, realizing the fatality and failure of Russia, they say, investigators, let's check. Why are they doing this? They want to hush up what happened as much as possible. Peskov, Lavrov, and Putin do not want to talk about the fact that a swarm of drones destroyed 41 units of their most important aircraft. It's better to keep quiet about it, not to mention it. You know, just like they didn't mention Navalny, Putin never said the word Navalny. They also don't want to mention the web. A drone hit strategic aviation. And they will continue to be silent. Well, let's remember the talks in Istanbul and the fact that, as Trump says, Putin, I don't know. Trump says, Putin probably wants peace. We'll see in 1 or 2 weeks. So the whole truth about this was told by Dmitry Medvedev. the former president of the Russian Federation, who now holds high positions in Russia. He decided to react to the actual strikes on Russian territory and wrote the following in his telegram. To all those who are worried and waiting for retaliation, you need to worry, Medvedev wrote. This is a property of a normal person. Retribution is inevitable. It should be remembered that the first point that Medvedev wrote was that our army is actively attacking and continuing the offensive. Everything that is supposed to explode will certainly be blown up, and those who are supposed to be destroyed will be destroyed.
Все, що має вибухнути, неодмінно буде висаджено в повітря, а ті, хто повинен був бути знищеним, буде знищений.
And secondly, he writes and actually frames Putin, the delegation, and all the Kremlin's false rhetoric. The talks in Istanbul, Medvedev writes, are not needed to compromise peace on unrealistic conditions invented by someone, but for our speedy victory and the complete destruction of the neo-Nazi government. This is the meaning of the Russian memorandum that was published yesterday. Medvedev admits that Russia needs the talks to cover up its further offensive and aggressive actions, and in fact it is a confession to Trump. Trump should have reacted to this, but so far, Lindsey Graham, the Republican senator, Trump's fellow party member, who is actively promoting a bill to impose sanctions on Russia, let me remind you, 500% duties on third countries.
Саме той сенатор-республіканець, однопартієць Трампа, який активно зараз просуває законопроект санкцій проти Росії. Нагадаю вам, 500% мит на треті країни.
Those countries that buy energy from Russia will be penalized and forced to pay 500% of the duties on goods they sell to the United States. This bill is primarily aimed at China, India, and, by the way, the EU countries that also buy energy from Russia. This is what Lindsey Graham said about Medvedev's statement, reposting it on his social network X. Congratulations, Mr. Medvedev, Lindsey Graham wrote in a rare moment of honesty from the Russian propaganda machine. I am grateful to you for making it clear to the world that Putin and Russia are not interested in peace. Well, it would seem that what more is needed for the White House and Trump to act, but I am convinced that, again, Trump will think, tell what he is watching.
Але більше переконаний, що знову ж таки Трамп буде думати, розповідати, що він дивиться.
Maybe Putin wants peace, maybe he doesn't. It's all obvious. I think that Trump is in such a difficult situation that he doesn't know how to invent and excuse this Putin. After analyzing the meeting in Istanbul, the White House gave its reaction and commentary. During the second round of talks in Istanbul, the Russian side handed over to Ukraine a memorandum on steps toward a ceasefire that contains a large number of unrealistic demands and outraged the United States. This was reported by ABC News with reference to American officials. They said they were disappointed but not surprised that Russia had put forward a list of demands, many of which the United States considers undesirable, and believe that Moscow is trying to delay the negotiation process.
Багато пунктів якого в США вважають небажаними. Вони вважають, що так Москва намагається затягнути переговорний процес.
The officials emphasized that even before the second round of talks in Istanbul, frustration with the lack of progress in achieving peace had been growing in the Trump administration. According to them, the American leader has become increasingly distant from Moscow in recent days. The publication reminded that Trump had previously threatened to impose new sanctions on Russia, but there had been no sign that the U.S. administration had taken any steps to fulfill his threat. The White House has also made it clear that the issue of imposing sanctions against Russia will be decided solely by Trump.
Також у Білому домі дали зрозуміти, що питання запровадження санкцій проти Росії вирішуватиме виключно Трамп.
White House spokesperson Caroline Leavitt, who always comes out and says what Trump thinks, was asked to comment on Trump's attitude to the bill to strengthen sanctions against Russia, which has the support of both houses of Congress, which I just mentioned. She said that Trump is wise to keep sanctions as a tool in his arsenal for when needed. She said, I would like to remind everyone how much we have accomplished in just 4 months. Last year at this time, Leavitt said, it was impossible to imagine that Russia and Ukraine would be holding direct talks, referring to the meeting in Istanbul. The Speaker believes that this happened precisely because of Trump's persistence and determination, so he is ready to apply sanctions if necessary. Both the Senate and Capitol Hill understand that the president is the commander-in-chief and directs U.S. foreign policy, as it should be, Leavitt said. She says that in the 4 months since Trump took office, there have been unprecedented steps toward progress. In contrast, she notes that the previous administration of Joe Biden had no contact with Putin at all, calling him an aggressor and a murderer. And here Trump has made huge progress because, as you can see, Russia and Ukraine are sitting at the negotiating table. However, this is all fiction and deception, because I would like to see this Leviticus and ask her on her fingers.
Це все фікція, це все обман, тому що я би хотів побачити цю левіт і запитати на пальцях.
Let her list what these contacts with the aggressor have brought, besides the fact that you are bringing out the occupiers, murderers, rapists of Ukrainian children and women from isolation. What did they give you? Where do you see a positive outcome, other than the fact that the terrorists sat down opposite Ukrainians, opposite the victim? What is the result? Perhaps Leavitt could talk about the exchange of prisoners of war, but we have already talked about this. This is a separate case, the humanitarian part, which was long and difficult, of course, but it would have continued without these meetings. These meetings are meant to negotiate a ceasefire, not to exchange prisoners of war, the severely wounded and other categories for fighters. Therefore, unfortunately, Leavitt has made no progress at all. Support for the idea of imposing new tough sanctions against Russia is growing in the U.S. Congress. Speaker Mike Johnson, who blocked new military aid to Ukraine 18 months ago, now supports it. According to TVP World, he praised a Senate bill by Senators Graham and Blumenthal targeting buyers of Russian energy and Russia's sovereign debt. The bill, already passed by the Senate, has now been approved by the House. Johnson told journalists many in Congress want the strongest sanctions on Russia.